At 3:17 a.m. in a rain-soaked Seattle hospital, 3 heartbeats began to fail, one by one. 20 specialists stood ready to cut, sedate, and surrender to protocol. But the person who stepped forward had no title, no authority, and everything to lose. She was a rookie nurse with shaking hands, borrowed knowledge, and 2 minutes before a Navy SEAL's unborn child slipped away forever. What followed wasn't loud. It wasn't heroic in the way movies promise. It was quiet, human, and terrifyingly fragile, and it changed every life in that room. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Seattle did not sleep gently. The city hardened at night. Cold rain pressed against the glass walls of downtown hospitals, streaking the windows in long, uneven lines that caught the glow of streetlights and bent them into pale reflections. Wind moved in from Elliott Bay, sharp with salt and steel, carrying the restless sound of water colliding with concrete docks. The streets below Harborview Medical Center glistened like a battlefield after rain, quiet, tense, waiting. Harborview stood awake on First Hill, a building that never rested because too many people depended on it not to. Inside, the air was stripped of warmth and softness. Fluorescent lights flattened shadows. Hallways stretched long and clean, smelling faintly of antiseptic and old metal. Time inside the hospital felt suspended, measured not by clocks but by monitors and footsteps and the opening and closing of doors. On the maternity floor, Nurse Eliza Monroe stood beside a supply cart, checking inventory with deliberate care. She was 26, slightly tall, slender without appearing fragile, her posture straight but reserved. Her brown hair was pulled into a tight bun, neat to the point of severity, and her face carried the pale undertone of someone accustomed to night shifts and artificial light. Her eyes, a muted gray-green, moved slowly, observant rather than reactive. Eliza counted gauze pads, paused, and counted again, not because she had forgotten the number, but because precision calmed her. It was her third night on this floor, her third night being present without being invited into anything that mattered. New nurses were not ignored openly at Harborview. They were simply not included. She closed the drawer and glanced at her watch. 11:42 p.m. "Monroe!" The voice came from behind her, clipped and efficient. Valerie Henson, the charge nurse, passed by without slowing. Valerie was in her mid-40s, tall and narrow-shouldered, with silver-threaded blonde hair cut sharply at her jawline. She had the posture of someone who had been obeyed for years and expected it to continue. "Prep room 3, Valerie said. "We might need it." "Yes, ma'am," Eliza replied. Valerie was already gone. Room 3. Eliza knew the number before she reached for a fresh set of linens. Everyone on the floor knew it. The case had been circulating all evening in quiet conversations and short updates, spoken carefully as if naming it too loudly might make things worse. A military family. A high-risk pregnancy. Triplets. As Eliza pushed the cart down the corridor, she passed the waiting area outside the maternity wing. A man sat alone on a bench, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tightly together. His presence altered the space around him, not through movement, but through stillness. Commander Jack Rowan was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, built with the dense strength of someone who trained not for appearance but for function. His dark hair was cropped short, streaked with gray at the temples, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a face marked by sharp lines and restraint. He wore jeans and a dark jacket, civilian clothes, but his posture remained unmistakably military. He watched the hallway the way a man watched a perimeter, alert without appearing restless. Eliza did not stare. She met his eyes briefly and nodded, a neutral acknowledgement. Jack returned the gesture with a single, controlled nod. Neither of them spoke. Inside room 3, the air felt heavier. Monitors beeped in irregular patterns, the sound steady enough to become background noise, but sharp enough to keep everyone alert. Megan Rowan lay propped against the bed, her body damp with sweat. She was 39, her auburn hair pulled back but slipping loose at the temples, freckles scattered across flushed skin. Her face showed exhaustion more than pain, the drawn, hollowed look of someone who had been awake and struggling for too long. Her breathing was uneven. Each contraction tightened her body visibly, shoulders curling inward, hands gripping the rails until her knuckles turned pale. She held her breath instinctively, bracing herself instead of moving with the rhythm. At the foot of the bed stood Dr. Harold Pierce, head of obstetrics. He was in his late 50s, balding, with wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose. His movements were precise, economical, shaped by decades of practice. He studied the data on his tablet with focused detachment, his expression calm but firm, a man accustomed to trusting protocols that had served him well. Nearby, Dr. Naomi Chen observed in silence. She was in her early 40s, petite, with black hair threaded with silver and tied back neatly. Her eyes followed Megan more often than the monitors, and she spoke only when necessary. "Eliza," Dr. Chen said without turning, "we'll need additional linens and neonatal support on standby." "Yes, doctor." Eliza moved efficiently, setting up the room without drawing attention to herself. As she worked, her focus remained on Megan. Something about the labor felt wrong, not in a dramatic way, not yet, but in a subtle, persistent sense that lodged itself in Eliza's chest. The contractions were strong, stronger than expected after this many hours. The body was not failing, it was resisting. A familiar discomfort stirred in Eliza's memory. She had seen this before, long before nursing school, long before hospital corridors and monitors. She remembered dimly lit rooms, hands guiding rather than commanding, voices that taught women how to listen instead of fight. She pushed the thought aside. This was not the place for that knowledge, not yet. Outside the room, a younger man leaned against the wall, trying too hard to look relaxed. Lucas Blue Carter, 29, was built lean and athletic, his sandy hair perpetually untidy despite regulation cuts. He wore the easy grin of someone who joked to soften tension, though his eyes betrayed unease. "I've been under fire," Blue muttered to Jack, attempting humor. "This is worse." Jack exhaled slowly. "You don't have to be here." Blue shrugged. "Wouldn't be anywhere else." Jack did not respond. His gaze remained fixed on the closed door. Eliza finished her tasks and stepped out of the room. In the supply corridor, she stopped at the sink and began washing her hands. Warm water ran over her skin as she lathered carefully, methodically. This was not habit, it was grounding. Her grandmother had taught her that hands remembered things the mind tried to forget. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text message. County clerk called again. "The house will be listed Friday if no response." Eliza closed her eyes briefly. The house. Her grandmother's house in Appalachia. Narrow, uneven floors. Windows that rattled in storms. A place where babies were born without machines, without hurry, guided by patience and trust. That knowledge felt far away here, unwelcome, almost irrelevant. She dried her hands and returned to the hallway. Room 3's door remained shut. The beeping continued behind it. Outside, the rain intensified, tapping insistently against the windows as if reminding the building that the night was far from over. Eliza stood quietly at the edge of the floor, unseen and uncalled, with the growing certainty that something was being missed. Not by accident, but by habit. The kind of habit that came from relying too heavily on machines and forgetting how to listen to bodies. She did not yet know she would speak. She did not yet know she would be asked to risk everything. She only knew this. No one was listening to Megan Rowan's body, and soon, someone would have to. By the time midnight slipped past Harborview's clocks, the rain outside had thickened into a steady, punishing sheet. Wind pressed against the hospital's upper floors, rattling window frames with a low, persistent insistence, as if the city itself were demanding answers from the building that refused to sleep. Inside the maternity wing, the air felt tighter than it had an hour earlier, the kind of tension that settled quietly before anyone named it. In room 3, Megan Rowan's labor had stalled in a way that didn't announce itself dramatically. There was no sudden alarm, no urgent shouting. Just a gradual, unmistakable sense that the progress everyone had been waiting for was not coming. Her contractions remained strong but uneven. Her breathing had grown shallow, clipped by exhaustion rather than pain. Sweat cooled on her skin, leaving her trembling between waves. Dr. Harold Pierce noticed first. He had seen this pattern too many times not to recognize it. He stood near the foot of the bed, shoulders squared, reviewing the latest readings on his tablet. His expression did not change, but the slight tightening at the corners of his mouth betrayed concern. Experience had taught him to trust patterns more than hope. "We're not moving forward," he said calmly. "More to the room than to any one person. 30 hours in active labor. Minimal descent. Dr. Naomi Chen stepped closer to Megan's side. She watched the woman's chest rise and fall, noted the way her hands curled inward with each contraction. "She's exhausted," Chen said, "physically and neurologically. She's burning energy fighting the contractions." Pierce nodded. "Which puts the babies at risk." Megan opened her eyes at the word risk. They were glassy, rimmed red, but still sharp enough to register fear. "Please," she said hoarsely, "I just need a minute." Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of someone who had been strong for too long. She had spent 17 years learning to endure disappointment, miscarriages that left her hollow, medical appointments that turned hope into charts and probabilities. When she had finally become pregnant, naturally and impossibly, she had sworn she would not complain, not once. But endurance had limits. Outside the room, Commander Jack Rowan stood with his back to the wall, arms crossed tightly over his chest. He had learned long ago how to look calm while his mind calculated worst-case scenarios. The habit came from deployments where panic could get people killed, but this was different. There were no orders to give, no tactical advantages to exploit, only waiting. Lucas Blue Carter hovered a few steps away, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He tried to keep his voice light when he spoke, but it rang hollow even to his own ears. "Docs are good here," he said. "Best in the state." Jack didn't look at him. "They're human," he replied. "Humans miss things." Blue fell, silent. He had joined the Navy at 19 to escape a childhood spent moving between relatives and half-kept promises. Training had given him structure. SEAL training had given him purpose. But nothing in his career had prepared him for standing outside a door, powerless, while someone else fought a battle he could not enter. Down the hall, Eliza Monroe paused at the nurse's station, scanning updated charts. She had not been assigned to room 3, but she had learned early that assignments didn't prevent observation. She read the numbers, noted the timeline, then looked up toward the closed door. The beeping from inside was steady, but it did not reassure her. It sounded mechanical, detached from what she had seen in Megan's body. Charge Nurse Valerie Henson approached, her expression brisk. "Monroe," she said, lowering her voice. "Stay available. This could turn quickly." "Yes, ma'am." Valerie hesitated for a fraction of a second, as if considering whether to say more. Then she straightened and moved on. Eliza leaned against the counter and folded her arms loosely, grounding herself. She replayed what she had observed earlier, the way Megan's shoulders tightened, the way her breath caught at the peak of each contraction. It wasn't failure, it was miscommunication. The body was doing its job. The mind was bracing instead of listening. A memory surfaced uninvited. Her grandmother's kitchen, linoleum worn thin, a kettle steaming on the stove, a laboring woman gripping the edge of a table, fear written plainly across her face. And her grandmother's voice, low and steady, "You don't have to fight what's trying to help you." Eliza exhaled slowly. This wasn't Appalachia. This was Harborview. Protocol mattered here. Titles mattered, and she was still the new nurse whose name people remembered only when they needed something carried or counted. Inside room 3, Dr. Pierce set the tablet down. "We need to prepare for surgical intervention," he said. "We can't wait until fetal distress forces our hand." Megan's head turned sharply. "No," she said, panic flaring. "I can do this. I just need—" Her voice broke off into a contraction, her body curling inward again, breath held tight. Dr. Chen placed a hand on Megan's arm, her touch reassuring but firm. "We're not saying now," she said. "We're saying soon, if nothing changes." The word soon echoed in the room like a closing door. Jack caught sight of the surgical consent clipboard being placed on the counter through the window. His jaw tightened. He had signed papers like that before, authorizing missions that carried risk, knowing full well that signatures could become memorials. This felt worse. This felt like surrender. Eliza saw it too. She stepped closer to the window, careful to remain unobtrusive. Through the glass, she watched Dr. Pierce speak quietly to Dr. Chen, saw Megan turn her face away, tears streaking down, flushed skin. Eliza's chest tightened with a familiar, unwanted urgency. She knew that look, the look of someone being prepared rather than supported. A new figure appeared at the end of the corridor, Dr. Samuel Ortega, the on-call anesthesiologist. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with dark hair peppered with gray and a neatly trimmed beard that softened an otherwise serious face. Years earlier, a complication during a routine procedure had cost a patient their life, an event that had shaped his cautious, methodical approach ever since. He moved with deliberate calm, eyes already assessing. "Getting ahead of things," Ortega said to Pierce as he entered. "Just in case." Pierce nodded. "I'd rather have you waiting than rushing." The phrase sent a ripple of unease through the hallway. Eliza's hands curled slightly at her sides. She told herself again that this was not her decision to make, that she was here to assist, not challenge, and yet the sense that something essential was being overlooked would not leave her alone. She caught Jack's eye through the glass. For a brief moment, their gazes held. His was sharp, searching, edged with restrained desperation. Hers was quieter, steadier, carrying a certainty she had not yet voiced even to herself. Jack looked away first. Inside, Megan's next contraction came hard and fast. She cried out, then immediately apologized, a reflex learned over years of minimizing her own needs. Dr. Chen exchanged a glance with Pierce. Time was narrowing. "We'll give it a little longer," Pierce said, "but we need to be ready." Outside, Eliza took a step back from the window. Her pulse beat loudly in her ears. She knew what she was seeing. She also knew what it would mean to say it out loud. Down the hall, the rain struck the windows harder, as if marking time. Midnight had passed, and with it, the illusion that this night would resolve itself without someone making a choice. Eliza closed her eyes, briefly, steadying herself. She did not yet know how or when, but the decision forming in her chest was becoming impossible to ignore. Soon, watching would no longer be enough. By 1 in the morning, Harborview felt sealed off from the rest of Seattle, as if the rain and wind had conspired to isolate the hospital from the world beyond its walls. The storm outside had not softened. Rain struck the windows in uneven bursts, and the wind carried a low moan through the upper floors, a sound that slipped into the corridors and lingered like a warning no one could quite name. Inside room 3, the rhythm of labor continued without progress. Megan Rowan lay on her side now, guided there by nurses following standard adjustments, but her body remained locked in a cycle of effort without reward. Each contraction arrived strong, undeniable, yet instead of carrying her forward, it left her more depleted. Her shoulders tensed before the pain even peaked, her breath catching high in her chest, as if she were bracing for impact rather than allowing movement. Dr. Harold Pierce stood at the counter, arms folded loosely, his tablet resting nearby. He had removed his glasses and cleaned them carefully with a cloth, a habit he'd developed over years of high-pressure cases. The gesture was small, controlled, a way of buying time. Pierce was not a careless man. He had built his career on caution after an early mistake, decades ago, when hesitation had cost a patient her life. Since then, he trusted protocols because they removed ambiguity. They told him when to stop waiting. "This isn't sustainable," he said quietly to Dr. Naomi Chen. "She's burning energy she doesn't have." Chen nodded, but did not answer immediately. She watched Megan closely, her gaze following the subtle movements of the woman's body, rather than the numbers on the monitor. Chen's calm had been forged during her years as a military obstetrician, where chaos was common and decisiveness often meant survival. She believed in intervention, but she also believed in timing. "She's not failing," Chen said finally. "She's stuck." Pierce's jaw tightened. "Stuck leads to failure if we let it." Megan's eyes fluttered open at the sound of their voices. She tried to speak, but another contraction rose too quickly. She gasped, fingers curling into the sheets, her breath caught in a sharp inhale she couldn't release. A low sound escaped her throat, not a scream, but something closer to frustration edged with fear. Outside the room, Commander Jack Rowan stood rigidly still. His arms were crossed, but his hands had clenched into fists without his noticing. He had learned to read rooms, to sense shifts before they were spoken aloud. This room had shifted. The air had gone from watchful to preparatory. Lucas Blue Carter leaned against the wall nearby, quieter now, the jokes gone. His eyes tracked every movement through the glass. "They're gearing up," he murmured. Jack didn't respond. He was focused on the clipboard resting on the counter inside the room. Consent forms always appeared before the conversation ended. He recognized that sequence too well. Down the hall, Eliza Monroe stood at the nurse's station, reviewing charts she already knew by memory. She hadn't been asked to do so. She simply needed something to anchor her hands. The sense of wrongness she'd felt earlier had deepened into something sharper, more urgent. Watching Megan through the glass, Eliza saw the same pattern repeat: contraction, resistance, exhaustion. The body wasn't being allowed to do what it was designed to do. It was being overridden by fear and fatigue. Charge nurse Valerie Henson approached, her steps brisk. "Monroe," she said, lowering her voice, "if this turns surgical, I'll need you available for recovery prep." "Yes, ma'am." Valerie hesitated again, studying Eliza for a moment. "You okay?" Eliza nodded. "Yes." Valerie accepted the answer and moved on. Inside room 3, Dr. Pierce picked up the tablet again. "We need to talk about timing," he said to Megan, keeping his voice calm and even. "You've been working very hard. At some point, we have to make a decision that protects you and the babies." Megan shook her head weakly. "I don't want surgery," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, stripped thin by hours of effort. I don't know how to stop fighting it." The words landed harder than any monitor alarm. Dr. Chen looked at her sharply. There it was. Not denial, not refusal. Awareness. Jack heard it through the door. His posture shifted, subtle but immediate. He stepped closer to the glass, his reflection overlapping Megan's image. For a moment, he looked not like a commander, but like a man watching his wife drown slowly while professionals debated rescue techniques. Eliza felt something settle into place inside her chest. Megan had said exactly what Eliza had been thinking since she first watched her breathe. The problem wasn't strength, it was direction. A new figure appeared at the end of the corridor. Evan Brooks, the hospital's overnight operations supervisor. Brooks was in his early 50s, heavy-set, with thinning hair and a permanent crease between his brows from years of managing crises that never made headlines. He wore a rumpled blazer over scrubs, his tie loosened, his expression already tense. He had been called because high-risk cases involving military families rarely stayed quiet. Brooks stopped near Valerie and spoke in a low voice. "What's the status?" "Borderline," Valerie replied. "They're discussing next steps." Brooks exhaled slowly. "Let me know if it escalates." Eliza watched the exchange, noting how quickly the system began to mobilize around the possibility of surgery. There were pathways for escalation, teams for intervention, entire protocols built for taking control. What there was not, she realized, was space for recalibration. Inside, Dr. Pierce reached for the consent clipboard. "I'd like to prepare you," he said to Megan, "not because we're doing this now, but because waiting too long removes choice." Megan turned her face away, tears streaking into her hairline. Jack's breath caught. He pressed his palm flat against the glass, stopping himself from knocking. That was when Eliza moved. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stepped forward until she was standing just outside the doorway, visible to everyone inside. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her posture remained steady. Shoulders relaxed, hands open at her sides. Dr. Chen noticed first. Her eyes flicked to Eliza, assessing. "Yes?" Chen asked. Eliza swallowed once. "May I say something?" The room stilled. Even the monitors seemed louder in the pause. Dr. Pierce turned, surprise flashing briefly across his face before discipline returned. "Nurse Monroe," he said, measured. "This isn't the time." Eliza held her ground. "With respect, doctor, she just told you the problem." Megan looked at her, startled. Jack's gaze snapped toward Eliza, sharp and searching. Dr. Pierce's voice hardened. "Step back." Eliza did not. Her hands trembled slightly now, but she kept them visible, empty. "She's not failing," Eliza said quietly. "She's bracing against every contraction. She doesn't need more force. She needs guidance." Silence stretched thin. Dr. Chen studied Eliza's face. She saw fear there, yes, but also certainty. The kind that didn't come from arrogance. The kind that came from having seen something work. Jack felt it too. He straightened, instinct rising like it always had before a turning point in a mission. This was the moment before someone either broke formation or changed the outcome. Dr. Pierce stepped forward, his voice low. "You're out of your depth." Eliza met his eyes. "I know my depth," she said, "and I know hers." The tension in the room became physical, pressing against skin and bone. Outside, the rain struck the windows harder, as if underlining the moment. Jack moved closer to the door. His voice carried through the room, calm but unmistakably firm. "Let her finish." Dr. Pierce turned toward him, incredulous. "Commander!" Jack didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I want to hear what she has to say." Eliza exhaled slowly. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Whatever happened next would define her place in this hospital, or end it. She took one more breath, grounding herself, and stepped fully into the room. The room held its breath. For a moment after Eliza Monroe stepped fully inside room 3, nothing moved except the monitors. Their beeps cut clean lines through the silence, indifferent to rank or hesitation. Rain continued to lash the windows beyond the wall, but inside the air had gone still, charged, as if a single wrong word could fracture it. Dr. Harold Pierce was the first to recover. He stood straight, shoulders squared, the authority of decades settling back into place. "Commander," he said to Jack Rowan, keeping his tone even, "this is a medical environment. We don't open the floor to opinions." Jack did not step inside the room. He remained just beyond the threshold, tall and immovable, his presence filling the doorway without obstructing it. His voice was calm, trained to carry without rising. "I'm not asking for opinions," he said. "I'm asking to hear a professional observation." Pierce's eyes flicked to Eliza, then back to Jack. "She's a new nurse." "I know," Jack replied. "I was once a new lieutenant. Didn't make me blind." Eliza felt the weight of every gaze in the room settle on her. Her pulse hammered, but she kept her stance neutral, feet planted, hands visible. She was acutely aware of the line she had crossed. There was no stepping back without consequence now. Dr. Naomi Chen moved closer, her posture attentive rather than defensive. "What do you see, Nurse Monroe?" she asked. Pierce shot her a look. "Naomi," Chen raised a hand, subtle but firm. "1 minute," she said. Her eyes returned to Eliza. "Speak clearly." Eliza nodded once. "Mrs. Rowan's contractions are strong," she said. "They're frequent and effective in isolation, but she's anticipating pain before it peaks. She tenses her shoulders and holds her breath. That shortens the contraction and keeps the babies from descending. She's exhausted because she's working against the wave." Megan Rowan turned her head, slightly toward Eliza, confusion and relief crossing her face in equal measure. That's what it feels like," she whispered. Pierce frowned. "We've adjusted position. We've coached breathing." "Yes, doctor," Eliza said, careful with her words. "But the coaching has been directive, not responsive. She needs time to reset her pattern, not push through it." The phrase hung in the air. Reset her pattern. Jack watched Pierce's jaw tighten. He recognized the look. Resistance shaped by responsibility. Pierce was not a villain. He was a man who had learned to carry blame by preventing risk. Jack understood that instinct intimately. "How long?" Pierce asked sharply. Eliza hesitated, then answered honestly. 10 minutes to change the pattern, 20 to see progress." Pierce shook his head. "And if there isn't any?" "Then we proceed as planned," Eliza said. "I won't interfere." Dr. Samuel Ortega, the anesthesiologist, cleared his throat. He stood near the wall, broad shoulders relaxed but eyes alert. "What she's suggesting isn't invasive," he said. "Positioning and breathing won't compromise anesthesia prep." Pierce turned toward him. "This isn't about anesthesia." Ortega met his gaze evenly. "It's about whether we try the lowest risk option before escalating." Dr. Chen watched the exchange, then glanced at the clock. Time mattered. So did judgment. "Harold," she said quietly, "we're not losing anything by listening." Pierce exhaled through his nose. The room waited. Outside the door, Lucas Blue Carter leaned forward without realizing it. His usual grin was gone, replaced by something intent and almost reverent. He had seen men speak up before, on decks, in briefing rooms, but rarely had he seen a voice this steady without rank to support it. Pierce finally looked back at Eliza. "No touching," he said. "No deviations from safety protocol. You speak. The nurses assist. I watch the monitors." Eliza nodded. "Yes, sir." Jack did not smile. He simply inclined his head, once, a silent acknowledgement that the line had been held. Eliza moved to Megan's side. She lowered her voice instinctively, narrowing the world to the two of them. "I need you to do less," she said gently. "Less effort, less bracing. We're going to let the contraction arrive before you react to it." Megan's eyes filled. "I don't know how." "That's okay," Eliza said. "I'll cue you." She turned to the bedside nurse, Karen Lowell, a woman in her early 50s, with soft features and graying hair pulled into a loose braid. Karen had worked labor and delivery long enough to recognize when something different was happening. She nodded once, ready to support without questioning. Eliza demonstrated the breathing with her own body, slow and grounded. "In through your nose," she said. "Count of 4. Out through your mouth, count of 6. When the contraction rises, don't push, let it lift you. Megan followed, clumsily at first, then with growing steadiness. The next contraction came. Eliza raised her hand slightly, palm down. Not yet, she murmured. Wait for the peak. Megan waited. Her shoulders stayed low, her breath stayed open. On the monitor, Dr. Pierce noted the contraction lengthen. The fetal heart rate held steady. Another contraction followed. Megan groaned, but she did not tense. Eliza shifted her position subtly, encouraging a side-lying posture that opened the pelvis without force. Karen supported Megan's leg with practiced ease. Dr. Chen's eyes flicked from the monitor to Megan's body, then back again. Something was changing, not dramatically, but enough to notice. Outside, Jack released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The room's tension shifted, loosening just a fraction. Megan's breathing had found a rhythm. Sweat still slicked her skin. But the frantic edge had softened into focus. Pierce checked the monitor again. There's descent, he said, surprised despite himself. Eliza did not look up. She stayed with Megan, voice steady, hands guiding without pressure. You're doing it, she said. Your body's doing it. Megan nodded weakly, tears slipping sideways into her hair. I can feel it, she whispered. At the 20-minute mark, Pierce straightened. He didn't smile. He didn't concede. But his tone had changed. We'll continue, he said. For now. Eliza allowed herself a single, silent breath of relief. This was not victory. It was permission. Jack stepped back from the doorway, giving the room space. His eyes met Eliza's briefly. In them, she saw not gratitude, but respect. The kind earned when someone steps forward without armor. Outside, the rain eased slightly, the storm loosening its grip on the city. Inside, the work continued, quieter now, steadier. Eliza stayed at Megan's side, knowing the fragile truth of the moment. Trust had been granted, not guaranteed. The space between orders had opened, but it could close just as quickly. The shift in the room was subtle, but unmistakable. It arrived not with cheers or declarations, but with a quiet recalibration of attention. The monitors continued their steady cadence, yet the sound no longer dominated the space. For the first time in hours, the focus was not on numbers or thresholds, but on the woman in the bed and the language of her body. Megan Rowan lay on her side, her breathing slower now, deeper, no longer climbing her chest in panicked bursts. Sweat still glazed her skin, but the frantic edge had eased into concentration. Her shoulders remained loose as a contraction built, and when it peaked, she did not fight it. She rode it, eyes closed, jaw relaxed, breath flowing through her mouth in a low, controlled exhale. Eliza Monroe stayed close, her posture calm, her movements economical. She did not touch unless necessary. Her hands hovered, ready, a presence rather than a force. She watched Megan's hips, the subtle tilt and release that signaled cooperation instead of resistance. Years of observation, of kitchens turned into birthing rooms, and women guided by trust rather than urgency, had taught Eliza what to look for. She had learned to read what textbooks rarely mentioned. Dr. Harold Pierce stood near the monitor, arms folded, his attention divided between the screen and Megan's face. He had not stepped away, nor had he interrupted. He watched the contraction trace lengthen, watched the fetal heart rate remain steady, and felt an old, uncomfortable sensation creep in, the awareness that something outside protocol was working. Dr. Naomi Chen had moved closer to the bed. She noted the change too, the way Megan's body seemed to reorganize itself, aligning effort with rhythm. Chen had seen this once before, years ago, during a field deployment where resources were limited and improvisation had been the only option. That memory had never left her. It stirred now, quietly affirming what she was witnessing. Outside the room, Commander Jack Rowan leaned against the wall, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to register. He did not smile. He had learned not to celebrate early, but he recognized momentum when he saw it. In combat, momentum was fragile. It had to be protected. Lucas Blue Carter stood a few feet away, hands clasped behind his head, eyes fixed on the window. Something's happening, he said under his breath. Jack nodded once. Yeah. Inside, the next contraction came stronger. Megan's brow furrowed, but she did not clamp down. Eliza lifted her hand slightly. Wait, she said softly. Let it crest. Megan waited, Her breath slowed. Her body opened. Karen Lowell, the senior nurse, adjusted Megan's leg support with practiced ease. Karen's face was calm, but her eyes shone with something like cautious optimism. She had been present for thousands of births, had seen trends cycle in and out of favor. What she saw now reminded her of an older rhythm, one she had learned early in her career before everything became faster, more managed. "Good," Karen murmured. "That's good." Dr. Pierce leaned closer to the monitor, then performed a careful assessment. His brows drew together, not in alarm, but in concentration. "There's definite descent," he said. "Slow, but measurable." Megan opened her eyes, searching faces. Is that good?" "Yes," Chen said before Pierce could answer. "It's good." Relief flickered across Megan's face, followed almost immediately by another wave. This one was different, deeper, purposeful. Eliza saw it and adjusted Megan's position slightly, encouraging a subtle rotation of the hips. She did not explain. She did not need to. Megan followed instinctively, as if her body had finally been given permission to lead. Then, a change. The monitor emitted a brief alert, sharp, insistent. Dr. Pierce stiffened. He stepped forward, eyes narrowing as he assessed the new pattern. "Heart rate. Deceleration," he said. "Transient, but notable." Jack straightened outside the door. Blue's hands dropped from his head. Eliza did not move. She watched Megan's face, watched the way the contraction ended, and the breath returned. She waited. Seconds stretched. The heart rate recovered. Pierce exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "We continue, but we're close to the edge." No one argued. They all knew it was true. Time compressed after that. Contractions came in steady succession, each one carving a little more space. Megan's voice dropped lower with effort, a sound pulled from deep within her chest. Eliza stayed near her shoulder, offering cues only when necessary, allowing Megan to do the work she had been prevented from doing for so long. At the 40-minute mark, Dr. Pierce checked again. His expression shifted. "Crowning," he said quietly. The word carried weight. Megan's eyes filled with tears. "I can't," she whispered, the doubt returning like a reflex. "I'm empty." Eliza leaned closer, her voice firm but gentle. "You don't need strength," she said. "You need timing. I'll tell you when." The room tightened again, every person acutely aware that this moment would decide whether the fragile progress held or collapsed. Dr. Ortega moved closer to the anesthesia cart, ready. Karen adjusted the lights. Dr. Chen positioned herself to assist. Outside, Jack pressed his palm against the glass once more, grounding himself. He had faced moments like this in other forms, breaches where hesitation meant casualties, extractions where timing was everything. He recognized the stillness before action. The next contraction surged. Eliza raised her hand. "Not yet," she said softly. "Wait." Megan waited, teeth clenched, breath open. "Now," Eliza said. Megan bore down, not with panic, but with precision. The effort was brief, controlled. Eliza watched the head emerge, felt the shift in pressure, and then saw the complication immediately. The umbilical cord lay looped tight across the baby's shoulder, pale and taut. Dr. Pierce saw it at the same moment. "Nuchal cord," he said, his voice crisp. "We need to—" "I see it," Eliza said. Her tone was steady, not defiant, certain. Dr. Pierce hesitated. Years of training urged him to intervene, to take control. But he also saw Eliza's hands, calm, deliberate, and the way Megan's body remained open rather than panicked. Dr. Chen watched closely, saying nothing. Eliza moved with careful precision. She did not pull, she did not rush. She guided the head slightly, waited for the next contraction's release, and then eased the cord free with a practiced motion that spoke of repetition rather than improvisation. The movement was small, almost invisible, but effective. Karen let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Clear," Eliza said. The next contraction came swiftly. Megan cried out, then pushed, and the baby slipped into Eliza's waiting hands, slick and warm and very much alive. The room erupted in sound, crying, gasps, the sharp intake of breath that preceded relief. The baby's cry cut through everything, loud and insistent. Jack sagged against the wall outside. A hand braced on the glass, his head bowed. Blue laughed once, sharp and incredulous, then wiped at his eyes. Inside, Dr. Pierce stared for a long second before collecting himself. "Time," he said. "Note the time." Karen wrapped the newborn quickly, efficient and gentle. Eliza passed the baby to Megan, who sobbed openly now, laughter tangled with tears. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi." But the room did not relax for long. The monitor changed again. The remaining babies shifted. One heart rate dipped, then dipped again, lower this time. Dr. Pierce's shoulders squared. "Second baby's in distress," he said. "We don't have the luxury of waiting." Eliza's chest tightened. She felt the clock snap back, into focus. She looked at Megan, who clutched the newborn weakly, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. This was the pivot, the moment where success could become catastrophe if mishandled. Eliza straightened, awareness sharp and cold. "We need to reposition," she said. "Now." Pierce turned to her, conflict flashing across his face. We can't afford not to," Eliza said. The room froze again, caught between outcomes. Jack's voice carried through the doorway, low and resolute. "Listen to her." Pierce met his gaze, then looked back at the monitor. Another dip. 2 minutes, Pierce said. "That's all you get." Eliza nodded once. That was enough. She moved back to Megan's side, already adjusting, already preparing for the next fight. The room tightened around the clock. 2 minutes was not a span of time. It was a verdict disguised as mercy. Dr. Harold Pierce stood with his eyes locked on the monitor, jaw set, shoulders squared, a man prepared to act the instant restraint became negligence. The fetal heart rate dipped again, brief, then lower than before, and recovered just enough to keep hope alive. Just enough. Eliza Monroe did not look at the monitor. She looked at Megan. Megan Rowan lay half-turned, one newborn pressed weakly against her chest, her arms trembling with the effort of holding him. The joy of the first cry had already begun to fade under a fresh wave of fear. Her skin had gone ashen beneath the flush, lips dry, eyes unfocused with exhaustion that bordered on collapse. 17 years of waiting had brought her here, and now her body was asking for something it no longer had in reserve. "I can't," Megan whispered, the words thin and broken. "I don't have anything left." Eliza leaned, in close enough that Megan could feel her breath. She kept her voice low, steady, stripped of urgency. "You don't need strength," she said again. "You need position and timing. Let me take the work you don't have." She turned to Karen Lowell, the senior nurse, who was already anticipating the request. Karen's face was calm, but the lines around her eyes had deepened. She had delivered babies back when rooms were quieter, and nurses were allowed more time. She had watched that time shrink year after year. "Help me roll her," Eliza said. "Gently." Karen nodded. Together they shifted Megan into a deeper side-lying position, elevating her upper leg and angling her pelvis forward. It was not dramatic, it was deliberate. Eliza supported Megan's back, her hand firm but not forceful, guiding alignment, bikisin rather than applying pressure. Dr. Naomi Chen watched closely, arms crossed loosely, eyes sharp. She recognized the positioning from a training she'd nearly forgotten, something she had learned overseas during a deployment where cesareans were not always possible, and birth demanded adaptability. "Heart rate's still dipping," Pierce said, his voice clipped. "You have 90 seconds. Outside the room, Commander Jack Rowan stood with his hands clasped tightly behind his back, the muscles in his jaw flexing. He had faced countdowns before, bomb timers, extraction windows, seconds measured in survival. This felt worse because he could not intervene. All he could do was witness. Lucas Blue Carter hovered near the wall, unusually silent. He had seen teammates wounded and bleeding, had dragged men twice his size under fire. Watching a woman fight exhaustion to save her child made his throat close in a way combat never had. Inside, Eliza placed one hand at Megan's hip and the other just below her ribcage, grounding rather than pushing. "When the contraction starts," she said softly, "don't push. Let your body rotate. I'll tell you when to help it." Megan nodded weakly. The contraction came. Eliza felt it immediately, the tightening beneath her palm, the subtle internal shift. Megan gasped, instinctively preparing to bear down. "Not yet," Eliza murmured. "Wait." Megan waited, breath trembling but open. On the monitor, the heart rate dipped again, lower this time. Pierce's shoulders tensed. Dr. Samuel Ortega moved closer to the anesthesia cart, hands ready. "Now," Eliza said. Megan gave a short, controlled push. It was not powerful. It was precise. Eliza felt the change, the second baby's position adjusting, pressure redistributing. The heart rate climbed, just enough to buy them seconds. Again, Eliza said, only when I say. The next contraction surged quickly. Megan cried out, tears streaming freely now. Eliza guided the motion, rotating Megan's pelvis a fraction more, her movements economical and practiced. Karen adjusted support without a word, trusting that the rhythm Eliza had established. Dr. Chen leaned in. There's movement, she said quietly. Pierce checked the monitor, then performed a rapid assessment. His brows knit together, not in alarm but in reluctant acknowledgement. Descent, he said. Minimal, but present. Jack exhaled slowly outside the door. Blue swallowed hard. Time did not slow, but perception did. Every second became distinct, heavy with consequence. The room moved as a single organism, attention aligned. Then the complication revealed itself. Eliza felt it before she saw it, a resistance that did not belong. She adjusted her angle slightly and saw the second baby's shoulder present awkwardly, not fully obstructed, but enough to threaten delay. Shoulder dystocia, Pierce said sharply. We need to... Wait, Eliza said, her voice firm now, not loud, certain. Pierce turned toward her, incredulous. That's not... It's positional, Eliza said. Not impaction. Let me rotate. Dr. Chen watched the angle of the shoulder, the tension in the surrounding tissue. She saw what Eliza saw. She's right, Chen said. It's not locked. Pierce hesitated. Years of training screamed for protocol, but years of practice also told him when force would make things worse. 30 seconds, he said. That's all. Eliza did not waste them. She guided Megan's upper leg higher, encouraged a deeper bend at the knee, and shifted her own stance to support the maneuver. Megan, she said, voice steady, unwavering, I need you to let your body turn. Don't push yet. Megan nodded, eyes squeezed shut, trusting because she had nothing else left. The contraction crested. Eliza felt the release and seized the moment, rotating the baby's shoulder with careful precision, a movement small enough to look insignificant, but timed perfectly to the body's natural opening. Now, she said. Megan pushed once, weak but willing. The shoulder cleared. Collective breath was released in the room. The baby slid free into Eliza's hands, limp for a terrifying half-second before drawing breath. Then a cry, thin at first, then strong, cut through the air. Dr. Pierce blinked, then straightened. Time, he said, his voice different now. Record the time. Karen wrapped the baby swiftly, efficient and gentle. Eliza placed the newborn against Megan's chest beside his sibling. Megan sobbed openly, her body shaking as relief and exhaustion collided. Jack sank down onto the bench outside the room, head in his hands, breath coming unevenly. Blue turned away, wiping his eyes without bothering to hide it. Inside, the room shifted again, not into celebration, but into vigilance. There was still a third baby. Dr. Pierce checked the monitor, his posture tightening once more. Third heart rate's unstable, he said. We can't let this drag. Eliza's chest tightened. She felt the familiar weight of consequence settle back, onto her shoulders. 2 successes did not guarantee a third. She looked at Megan, whose eyes were already closing, consciousness slipping under the weight of effort and relief. Stay with me, Eliza said, gently cupping Megan's face. I need you here. Megan opened her eyes, unfocused but responsive. I'm here, she whispered. Dr. Chen stepped closer. What do you need? She asked Eliza. Eliza did not hesitate. We need gravity, she said, and we need it now. Pierce's mouth opened, then closed. He checked the monitor again. Another dip. He nodded once. Do it. Karen and Chen moved immediately, working with Eliza to reposition Megan as safely as possible, angling her torso forward, encouraging a position that would let gravity assist rather than resist. Eliza supported Megan's weight, her arms steady despite the strain. Outside, Jack stood again, instinctively, as if bracing for impact. Inside, the next contraction arrived, slower, weaker. Megan barely reacted. Eliza leaned close, her voice quiet but urgent. This one needs help, she said. I'll guide you. You just breathe. The monitor dipped again. Now, Pierce said, tension sharpening his voice. Eliza adjusted her stance, grounding herself, and guided the third baby's descent with every ounce of attention she had left. The room held its breath. The room felt smaller with every second that passed. After the second baby's cry faded into a steady rhythm of breathing against Megan Rowan's chest, the silence that followed was heavier than before. It was not the silence of relief. It was the silence that arrives when everyone understands that the hardest part has been postponed, not avoided. The monitor at the foot of the bed drew the eye despite every effort to ignore it. The third baby's heart rate flickered unevenly, climbing briefly, then dipping again, each descent lasting just a fraction longer than the last. Not catastrophic, not yet, but trending in a direction no one wanted to name. Dr. Harold Pierce stood closer now, his earlier restraint giving way to readiness. His shoulders were squared, his hands resting near the edge of the bed, posture signaling that intervention was no longer theoretical. Years earlier, a delayed decision in a similar case had cost a child oxygen and left Pierce carrying the memory like a scar he never spoke of. It had shaped him since. He did not hesitate lightly anymore. "We're running out of margin," he said, voice low but unmistakably firm. "If this doesn't turn quickly, we move." Dr. Naomi Chen nodded once. She could see it too. The third baby had not benefited from the space created by the first two births. He was deeper, slower to respond, his position less forgiving. Eliza Monroe felt the shift as keenly as anyone in the room. She was aware of the ache in her arms from supporting Megan's weight, of the sweat dampening the back of her scrubs, of the quiet tremor threatening her hands if she let go of focus for even a moment. She did not look at the monitor. She did not look at Pierce. She looked at Megan. Megan's eyes were half closed now, lashes clumped with tears and sweat. Her breathing had gone shallow again, not from panic this time, but from depletion. She had given everything she had to give. The newborns lay against her chest, wrapped tightly, their small bodies rising and falling with fragile insistence. Megan's fingers curled weakly around them, instinct refusing to release what she had fought so long to hold. "Eliza," Megan whispered, her voice barely audible, "I'm fading." The words landed like a blow. Eliza moved closer, one hand cupping Megan's cheek, grounding her. "Stay with me," she said quietly. "Just stay. You don't have to do anything else yet." Dr. Samuel Ortega stepped nearer to the anesthesia cart, his face grave but controlled. The overhead lights caught the silver at his temples, emphasizing the lines etched by long nights and difficult outcomes. "We're at the point where we need to decide," he said. "If we go surgical, it needs to be now." Outside the room, Commander Jack Rowan stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He had listened to countdowns before, had known the sound of time slipping away. This was worse. Here, he could not move, could not shield, could not trade places. He watched his wife's strength ebb and felt the helplessness press in from all sides. Lucas Blue Carter stood a few feet behind him, unusually still. His eyes had gone glassy, his earlier humor completely absent. He had grown up without siblings, without much family at all. Watching three lives balanced on breath and timing stirred something raw and unfamiliar in him. Inside, Eliza straightened slightly, her awareness narrowing. This was the moment where instinct either sharpened or failed. She had no room left for doubt. "We still have one option," she said. Pierce turned toward her sharply. "This isn't the time for experiments." "It's not an experiment," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the weight pressing against her ribs. "It's alignment. He's not descending because gravity hasn't had a chance to help." Chen's gaze flicked from Eliza to Megan, then back to the monitor. "What are you proposing?" Eliza did not hesitate. "A supported forward position, full assistance. I'll take the load." Pierce's mouth tightened. "That puts strain on the mother." "So does surgery," Eliza replied, "and she's still responsive." Megan stirred faintly. "I'm here," she whispered, as if to prove it. Chen stepped closer to Pierce, lowering her voice. "Harold," she said, "we can attempt it for one contraction. If it doesn't help, we move immediately." Pierce looked at the monitor again. Another dip. Shorter this time, but unmistakable. "One contraction," he said. "That's all." Eliza nodded. That was all she had been asking for. Karen Lowell moved without being told, her years of experience filling the gaps words could not. Together with Chen, they repositioned Megan carefully, angling her torso forward while supporting her weight on either side. Eliza braced her stance, muscles tightening as she took on more of Megan's load, her arms firm, her grip sure. Eliza leaned close, her voice low and anchored. "This one isn't about pushing," she said. "It's about opening. Let your body drop. I've got you." Megan nodded weakly, trust overriding exhaustion. The contraction came slower than the others, almost hesitant. Eliza felt it build beneath her hands, felt the subtle shift of pressure as gravity began to assert itself. She guided Megan's hips gently, encouraging release rather than effort. On the monitor, the heart rate wavered, then steadied. Chen's breath caught. "There," Eliza said. "That's it. Don't push." The contraction peaked. Megan's body trembled, but she stayed open, breath shallow but present. Eliza adjusted her stance, taking more of the weight, letting gravity do what force could not. The monitor spiked. Pierce leaned in. "There's movement," he said, disbelief threading his voice. Eliza felt it too, the unmistakable slide, the shift of position that signaled descent. She guided carefully, timing, everything to the rhythm of Megan's breath. "Now," she said softly, "just help it." Megan bore down weakly, almost imperceptibly. It was enough. The third baby emerged into Eliza's hands, limp and silent. Time stopped. For a half-second that felt like a lifetime. The room held its breath. Eliza rubbed the baby's back firmly but gently, her movements automatic, drilled by repetition and memory. She adjusted the angle, cleared the airway with practiced efficiency. "Come on," she thought, not praying exactly, but willing with every fiber of her being. Then the baby coughed, a thin sound at first, then another, then a cry, small, indignant, alive. The room exhaled as one. Karen let out a sob she didn't bother to suppress. Chen covered her mouth with one hand, eyes shining. Even Pierce's composure cracked for a brief instant, his shoulders sagging as the tension released. Outside, Jack Rowan's legs gave way. He sank onto the bench, head dropping into his hands as a sound escaped him that was equal parts laughter and grief. Blue turned away, wiping his face with the heel of his palm, his chest heaving. Inside, Eliza wrapped the third baby and placed him against Megan's chest beside his siblings. Megan's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but searching. When she felt the weight of all three children against her, a broken sound left her throat. "They're here," she whispered. "All of them." Eliza nodded, her own vision blurring despite her efforts. "You did it," she said. "They're all here." Dr. Pierce straightened, professionalism returning, but his voice was different now, softer. "Stabilize mother and infants," he said. "Let's keep this room calm." As the team moved with practiced efficiency, Eliza stepped back for the first time in what felt like hours. The adrenaline began to ebb, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She leaned against the counter briefly, steadying herself. Jack appeared at the doorway, eyes red-rimmed, face drawn. He met Eliza's gaze, and for a moment, words seemed insufficient. Then he nodded, slow, deliberate, a soldier's acknowledgement, respect given without ceremony. Eliza returned the nod, just as quietly. Outside, the rain finally eased, the storm loosening its grip on Seattle. Dawn was still hours away, but something in the air had shifted. Inside Harborview, 3 new lives breathed steadily, unaware of how close the world had come to losing them. Eliza looked once more at the family gathered around the bed, then turned away, knowing her role here was finished. What remained would come later, the questions, the consequences, the reckoning. For now, the night had delivered what it could. Morning arrived without ceremony. Seattle did not announce dawn with warmth or color. It simply loosened the darkness, layer by layer, until the rain softened into mist and the gray light slipped between buildings and hospital windows. Harborview Medical Center exhaled as the night shift ended, the building settling into a quieter rhythm that belied what had taken place inside its walls only hours earlier. Room 3 was no longer an emergency. The machines still hummed, but their urgency had dulled into routine monitoring. Megan Rowan lay propped slightly on the bed, her skin pale but stable, her breathing slow and even. All 3 babies were tucked against her chest in a careful arrangement of blankets and small limbs, their tiny faces pink and creased, their mouths working reflexively as they slept. The chaos of their arrival had already begun to fade into something gentler, something human. Commander Jack Rowan sat in the chair beside the bed, his broad frame folded inward in a way few had ever seen. He had removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and scarred by years of training and deployment. His dark hair was threaded with gray at the temples, his beard trimmed but rough with fatigue. He looked older than he had the night before, but also lighter, as if a weight he had carried for nearly 2 decades had finally been set down. Jack reached out carefully, his large hand hovering before settling against the back of the third baby, his touch reverent, almost uncertain. He had carried wounded men from battlefields without hesitation, but this fragile warmth required a different kind of courage. "They're real," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Megan turned her head slightly, managing a tired smile. Her dark hair was plastered to her temples, strands escaping the loose braid Karen had redone hours earlier. Her face bore the marks of exhaustion and effort, but her eyes were clear now, and anchored. "They stayed," she said softly. "All of them." Jack nodded, swallowing hard. He leaned down and pressed his forehead briefly to hers, a gesture small and private. Years of restraint cracked in that simple movement. Across the room, Dr. Harold Pierce stood with a tablet in his hands, reviewing vitals with deliberate focus. In the clearer light of morning, the lines on his face were more visible, etched deep by long responsibility. He had not slept. He had not left. The events of the night replayed behind his eyes, whether he wished them to or not. Dr. Naomi Chen stood beside him, arms folded loosely, her posture relaxed for the first time since the delivery. Her black hair was pulled back neatly, as always, but her expression had softened. She glanced toward the bed, then back to Pierce. "They're stable," she said quietly. "All 3. Mother, too." Pierce nodded. "Yes, I see that." What he did not say was what weighed heavier, the realization that stability had come from a place he had not trusted, from hands without authority, from a voice he had nearly silenced. Eliza Monroe stood just outside the room, leaning lightly against the wall, her arms crossed more to contain herself than for comfort. The adrenaline had long since burned away, leaving behind a deep, pervasive fatigue that settled into her bones. Her scrubs were wrinkled now, damp at the collar, her dark hair pulled back in a loose, imperfect knot. She looked smaller in the daylight, younger, stripped of the intensity that had carried her through the night. Karen Lowell approached quietly, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She offered one to Eliza. "You forgot to eat," Karen said, her voice gentle. Eliza accepted the cup, her hands shaking slightly now that the moment had passed. "So did you," she replied. Karen smiled faintly. She was in her early 50s, her face soft, but marked by years of night shifts and hard cases. Her braid had come loose, gray, strands framing her face. "I've forgotten before," she said, "but not many nights like this one." Eliza looked down at the hall, toward the window at the end of the corridor where the city was slowly emerging from rain and shadow. "I didn't know if it would work," she admitted quietly. Karen sipped her coffee. "That's not the same as not knowing what you were doing," she said. "There's a difference." The door to room 3 opened, and Dr. Pierce stepped out. He paused when he saw Eliza, as if measuring something invisible between them. For a moment, neither spoke. "Miss Monroe," Pierce said finally. His voice was measured, controlled. "Walk with me." Eliza nodded, setting the coffee aside and following him down the corridor. Their footsteps echoed softly against the linoleum as they moved away from the room, past nurses changing shifts and orderlies pushing carts, past a world returning to normal. Pierce stopped near the nurse's station, turning to face her. In the brighter light, his eyes looked tired but not unkind. "You acted outside your assigned role last night," he said. Eliza met his gaze, her posture straight. "Yes, sir. You challenged protocol. Yes. You influenced decision-making in a high-risk situation." Eliza did not look away. "I did." Pierce studied her for a long moment. "You understand what that usually means." Eliza nodded. "I do." Silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of monitors and morning announcements. Pierce exhaled slowly. "And yet," he continued, 3 infants and their mother are alive because of those actions." He shifted his weight, discomfort evident. "I've spent my career believing that control is the same as safety. Last night forced me to question that." Eliza said nothing. This was not a moment to argue. Pierce's jaw tightened. "There will be a review," he said. "There has to be." "I understand. But it will not be a disciplinary one," he added. "Not unless the facts demand it." Eliza felt her chest loosen slightly, though she kept her expression neutral. Pierce glanced back toward the room 3. You saw something the rest of us missed, he said. That matters, whether the system likes it or not. Before Eliza could respond, another figure approached from the end of the hall. Commander Jack Rowan walked toward them, his stride steady, his presence unmistakable even out of uniform. In the softer light, the sharp angles of his face seemed less severe, though the discipline remained. He stopped a respectful distance away, nodding first to Pierce, then to Eliza. Doctor, Jack said. Nurse. Pierce inclined his head. Commander. Jack turned his attention fully to Eliza. His eyes were red-rimmed, his voice low. I haven't thanked you, he said, and I won't do it lightly. Eliza shifted uncomfortably. I was doing my job, she said. Jack shook his head. No, he replied. You were doing more than that. You stood when it would have been easier to step back. He paused, choosing his words with care. Men under my command have lived because someone like you spoke up when it wasn't their place. I don't forget that. Eliza swallowed. I'm glad they're safe, she said. All of them. Jack nodded. So am I. He hesitated, then added, if there are questions later, reviews, boards, I'll be available. Pierce looked at him sharply. Jack met his gaze without flinching. Not to interfere, Jack clarified. To tell the truth. Pierce studied him for a moment, then nodded once. That may be necessary. Jack turned back to Eliza. My family will want to see you, he said. When you're ready. Eliza managed a small smile. Maybe later. Jack inclined his head again, a gesture of respect, then turned and walked back toward room 3. As he disappeared through the doorway, Eliza let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The rest of the morning unfolded in fragments. Reports were written. Vitals were checked. The night's intensity was translated into clinical language, stripped of emotion, cataloged for review. Eliza completed her charting carefully, her handwriting neat, despite the tremor still lingering in her fingers. By mid-morning, Dr. Chen joined her at the station. Administration will want a statement, she said. I'll be there. Eliza nodded. Thank you. Chen studied her for a moment. She was a composed woman in her 40s, her movements precise, her gaze discerning. Where did you learn what you used last night? She asked. Eliza hesitated. My grandmother, she said. She wasn't a doctor. She delivered babies at home, in places where hospitals weren't an option. Chen nodded slowly. Medicine forgets its elders sometimes, she said. That doesn't mean the knowledge disappears. When Eliza was finally cleared to leave, she stepped outside into the cool morning air. The rain had stopped entirely now, leaving the city washed and quiet. She stood for a moment on the hospital steps, letting the light touch her face. Inside, 3 new lives breathed steadily. A family had been rewritten, and somewhere between protocol and instinct, a line had shifted. Eliza did not know what consequences would come next. She only knew that when it mattered, she had listened. To the body, to the moment, to the quiet certainty that had guided her hands. For now, that was enough. That night in Seattle did not end with thunder or applause. It ended with 3 fragile breaths, a mother still alive, and a room full of people who realized something sacred had passed through their hands. Some call it skill, some call it instinct. But for those who have lived long enough, it has another name: grace. The Bible tells us that God often speaks not in fire or wind, but in a still, small voice. And sometimes that voice sounds like a young nurse saying, wait. Sometimes it sounds like a mother finding strength she thought was gone. Sometimes it sounds like hope whispering when fear is shouting. Miracles are not always loud. They don't always come wrapped in perfection. Often they come through ordinary people who choose courage over silence, compassion over status, and faith over fear. In everyday life, you may feel overlooked. You may feel unqualified, unheard, or too small to matter. But remember this: God has always done his greatest work through the ones the world forgets: the shepherd, the widow, the child, the quiet soul who refuses to turn away. If this story touched you, let it remind you to trust that still voice inside you, to stand when it would be easier to step back, to believe that even in your weakest moment, God can use you to protect life, restore hope, and change the course of someone else's story. If you believe in quiet miracles, share this story with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. And if you want more stories that restore faith in humanity and God's gentle presence in the world, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. May God bless you, protect you, and remind you, especially in hard times, that you are never alone and that hope often arrives in the most unexpected hands.